Matteo Tempestini, thank you very much that you took your time or take your time for us for lecture about your research in the Alps and the media awards and exhibitions, what it really means for architecture. I think it's a super important issue, and not only in the historical part, because your research is in the 90s, 2000, and so on. There, it was very important if you are published in a journal, you arrived somewhere, or your project has a certain value, which is quite important to jump out of the ordinary or the non really important architecture. Today, I think it's still the same, but it's even more tricky, because in those days we still had people in journals working, or for journals, or for normal journals working, which were really educated in architecture and design. Today, these people only work in architecture magazines, in specific magazines. But I think it's very important to jump as well out of our circles, which we know, the people we know, just a small crowd we talk with. And your research, the Making of Alpine Architecture Media Awards and exhibitions in Vorarlberg and Grison, just focus on that I even could say game between these different kind of things, which I think is really important, because it's not just it's not just needed as it's not just needed to be published, it's as well needed for the discourse to be seen. I remember when we had when we had the opening of the Kirchner Museum in Davos, the glass facade was often damaged or broken in by people throwing stones on it, because it was just a simple glass facade, industrial glass facade, and it had no value. But the more it got published, the more it got recognized, even outside the walls, outside of Switzerland, outside in the small architecture crowd, the whole thing got more important. And it really was putting this museum in a different level. And it is recognized as a masterpiece for a younger generation of architects. And for me, when I was studying, it was really one of a masterpiece of the things we were looking for, or the things we were interested in. Today, it's quite important. It's still important that it's not just politicians, it's not just about money, it's about architecture as a teamwork, as a design work, as a craft which creates possibilities for life in alpine regions. Probably the Alps is quite important. No, it's quite obvious that it's important, because money is not so much spread out. So you need to take particularly care what you do with it. And if you invest it right, you have a double or triple impact in what you do, and not just solve the immediate function you're looking for. And that's really a good and important thing. Today, we often forget in these general publications to name the architects. And I think it's a pity where we are in, that these creators, or these people who create these kind of works, are not anymore so much recognized. But without them, we are not able to jump out of the ordinary. And especially your research is very much focusing on the value of being recognized. And these generations you were talking about, prizes, exhibitions, awards, media, were crucial to create or to make it happen in Vorarlberg and Grisons, what we have. And therefore, I'm really looking for your lecture and your research topic about the whole thing. What's quite interesting, you studied in Rome, the bachelor, and then you came over to Torino, so you're a little bit an outsider in a certain way. Nevertheless, you jumped really into the whole thing quite deep. I was part in your PhD supervising group, so I know a little bit what you really did and how you did it, and it's really amazing how careful you really looked for and digged into the whole thing. And this really is really super important for me and the whole group, the whole thing, what you will present. And then you did your doctorate in 2024 in Torino at the Politecnico. You even worked since 2020 for Alp, this very important architecture journal about architecture in the Alps and the whole Alps, really from France to Slovenia. And at the moment, you're very much diving into the master planning, into the group of the master planning of the Politecnico in Torino. So you're there in the planning group. So you're back into practice. And I think it's a very important thing that we don't do theory for theory, we do theory for the practice. And that's why I really love to look for these relations and to combine these kind of things, because then we really do something for our profession and we are able to jump out of the ordinary. Really looking forward to your lecture, and later on we can still discuss what you are presenting.
Thank you very much, Daniel. I really appreciate your invite this evening. Let's start. I will share my screen. Okay. So as you previously said, today I will share with you my research that started during my PhD. The research is about the critical reception of contemporary architecture and in particular of Alpine architecture.
Matteo,
yeah,
just one thing. Could you remove this little slide which is in the middle, or just shift it to the side?
this one?
Yes,
Okay,
very good.
perfect. So I will present a part of my research, which was also included in a book that was recently published with Jovis Verlag. There is this one. I don't know if you can see it from my webcam, but it
Yes.
is titled "The Making of Alpine Architecture," and the book and the presentation of today focus on what goes on behind the scenes, let's say, of contemporary Alpine architecture. We will focus on two regions, the Grisons and the Vorarlberg, because they are, let's say, the most important for what concerns Baukultur in the Alpine territory. Let's say the story this evening will focus particularly on the persons, on the people that contributed to the creation of this Baukultur. As you said before, also the role of the people and not only of the built objects is very important in the explanation and the history of architectural culture. One above all of the protagonists is Peter Zumthor, was St. Benedict Chapel we can see in this slide. Let's start right away with a question. What is Alpine architecture? It could seem like a mundane, a banal question, and one can simply answer that it is architecture that is built inside the Alps, the Alpine territory. From a certain point of view, this is true, this is correct. And we will see further in the presentation that in some cases it is precisely this logic that define the field of Alpine architecture. But today we mean with this term, let's say, a much more complex concept. Indeed, as Bruno Reiklin rightly defines it, Alpine architecture is a cultural construct. Reiklin was a member of the jury of the important Neues Bauen in den Alpen award that started in 1992 and lasted till 2006. According to Reiklin, Alpine architecture is a cultural construction because it is formulated a posteriori, observing objects placed in relation to the mountains, both as a phenomenon and as a representation. It still sounds like an abstract definition, so I will try to clarify it by working through exclusion and contrast. Here we can see the famous St. Benedict Chapel by Zumthor, a work I believe that all of you know. This work won the first edition of Neues Bauen in den Alpen, and it became the symbol of contemporary Alpine architecture, consecrating Zumthor as the forefather of contemporary Alpine architects. No one, I imagine, would question the alpineness of this building, let's say. It is located at mid-slope in a small hamlet of the Sundvik municipality. The use of local materials like the large shingles also roots it deeply in the territory and its alpine context. Now let's look at another project by Zumthor, also very famous, the shelters for Roman archaeological excavation in Chur. This is also a famous work by Zumthor that won also the first edition of the regional prize Gute Bauten Graubünden, as we will see after. This building was not taken in consideration by the jury of Neues Bauen in den Alpen. But why? It is by Zumthor, it is in Chur. Chur is an alpine city. We cannot put in doubt this fact. But actually, it was not taken into account because it do not respect the idea of alpineness that the jury of the prize, Reiklin, Friedrich Leitner, and others, hypothesized a posteriori, as we said before. So a relationship with the mountains as a phenomenon and as a representation. So working by exclusion, Neues Bauen in den Alpen constructed a precise image of Alpine architecture. An image that distances itself from urbanity and search for a relationship with the landscape. This map shows very clearly in Vorarlberg and in the Graubünden all the awarded prizes that are highlighted with a cross are not in the two main cities that are Chur and Bregenz. Let us return then to the initial question. What is Alpine architecture? This time we lean on the words of Friedrich Leitner, another great historian and theorist of architecture, and that was also a jury member of Neues Bauen in den Alpen. According to him, it is impossible to classify architectural works in strict categories. Indeed, flexibility is required. A critic must be ready to modify the boundaries of these definitions deciding case by case whether to include or exclude some projects that at first glance might seem very similar. And this is precisely what the award did across the 4 editions between 1992 and 2006. As I said before, Neues Bauen in den Alpen was the most important cultural event in the field of architecture in the Alpine territory since the early 90s. It will accompany us through the entire first part of the presentation because it's the core around which the events and the protagonists of Alpine architecture revolve until the early years of the 2000s. The award was born from the initiative of Sesto Cultura and Christoph Meyer-Fingerle, a South Tyrolean architect that was active since the mid-80s in the cultural scene of South Tyrol, inviting also still little known Peter Zumthor to Bolzano to present his work in 1985. After an initial collaboration with Sesto Cultura, Fingerle decided to launch an architectural award that will serve as a platform to collect all the best works of Alpine architects. Thus, in 1992, Neues Bauen in den Alpen was created. Years later, Fingerle would admit that the award was also created at the behest of Sesto Cultura, that is, Sesto in Valpusteria is an important tourist destination in South Tyrol. So the award was created with the aim of supporting mountain tourism by creating a strand dedicated to contemporary architecture. It is also probably for this reason that the awarded buildings had to evoke an image that is as distant as possible from the one of the city and of the urban environment. This reveals a crucial fact that will come back also in other part of the presentation, that the architectural criticism is never an end in itself, and the interest at stake often extend far beyond the professional field. And in this case, they reach and they touch also the economic sphere. In any case, the first edition was won by Zumthor, as I said before, with the St. Benedict Chapel, which is also featured in the cover of the catalog, as we can see here, with a photo of Hans Danuser. As we will see, in this award, designers from Grisons obtained a lot of recognition and success in all the editions. But Fingerle was not the only one doing such an important cultural work. Actually, since the late 70s, Zumthor and other Grisons designers such as Obrist or Fontana, for example, had begun a fundamental effort to build an architectural culture at a small scale, at a regional scale. Indeed, in 1979, a group of young designers, among which there was also Peter Zumthor, took over the leadership of the Bühner Heimatschutz, and a few years later, they managed to secure a cantonal funding to launch a prize, an award, namely Gute Bauten Graubünden. Several designers participated in the first edition, and the same Zumthor won with 3 projects, among which also the shelter for Roman excavation in Chur that we saw a moment ago. At the same time, while promoting local architectural culture, Zumthor also began to carefully curate the representation and the publications of his works. The first public event was the exhibition held in 1988 entitled Partituren und Bilder, Scores and Image, where his projects were portrayed to the lens of Hans Danuser. That professional partnership will be so significant that the theorist Philip Ursprung, defined this moment a turning point that changed architectural photography. Indeed, Danuser's shots were highly unconventional. They isolate the work and architecture from its context, using fog, so natural elements, or peculiar exposures, and focus on minimal details to highlight the materiality of the object even before its space. His photographs for that exhibition, especially those from the St. Benedict Chapel, one of which is shown in this slide, profoundly influenced both the representation of sacred mountain architecture that actually would become a true topos of contemporary alpine architecture, as we will see, and also the international image of Zumthor work. In 1995, we arrived at the second edition of Neues Bauen in den Alpen. The winners were Peter Markli with the project for La Congiunta Museum in Giornico, in Ticino, and the duo Gigon and Guier with the Kirchner Museum in Davos that you mentioned a few moments ago. It is from this edition in 1995 that the award's role of honor was monopolized by Grison's architects and designer, or for German-speaking Switzerland, let's say, like Merkli or Gigon and Guier. More and more, in fact, Grison architecture would become identified through a synecdoche with the entirety of Alpine architecture. This happened not only with the event curated by Fingerle, but also in international publications, as we will see later. The third edition of Neues Bauen in den Alpen actually marked an international breakthrough for the Alpine architectural production. The winners of this edition, held in 1999, were Jörg Konzett with the Traversina footbridge, and again, Peter Zumthor with his project for the famous Valls thermal baths. The history of the thermal baths began actually more than 10 years before, in 1986. And after a rather, let's say, troubled process and long process and the numerous revisions of the project, the work was completed in 1996, 10 years later. The baths are undoubtedly Zumthor's most well-known work, and the one that propelled him in the Olympus of international star architects. A path that will culminate in the Pritzker Prize that he won in 2009. Beyond the fame that achieved to its designer, the building played a fundamental role in the tourist revitalization of Valls. In just a few years, actually, the baths became a formidable attraction, both for architectural and traditional tourism, transforming Valls into one of the most renowned touristic destination, on par with other established and more traditional Swiss tourist resorts. This success paved the way for subsequent architectural interventions in Valls that aimed at capitalizing the village attractive and appeal. Zumthor himself built 3 holiday homes in the hamlet of Leis, southwest of the center of Valls. Or I think about the Villa Valls by Search Architects, the Dutch studio. That is a complete underground structure immediately near the Valls thermal baths that was conceived as a luxury holiday residence. However, Zumthor's definitive entry into the global star system of architecture was in the, let's say, 1 or 2 years before the third edition of Neues Bauen in den Alpen, and was sanctioned by 2 international publications. The issue 798 of Domus, published in 1997, and double issues 88 and 89 of El Croquis, published a year later in 1998. Both magazines celebrated this transition to the let's say, jet set of international architecture. The issue of Domus was dedicated precisely to the global architectural star system and placed the Waldster Malbatz alongside, for example, Frank Gehry Guggenheim's Museum, as well as by works of Foster, Piano, and Hollein. To better understand the global resonance of the Waltz project, consider that opening article in Davos, less than a year after the inauguration of the building, already declared the Baths as a monument in the history of European architecture. On Le Croquis, Zumthor was in excellent company, same way, alongside Jean Nouvel, Rem Koolhaas, Stephen Hall, Toyo Ito, and the omnipresent Frank Gehry with the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao. At the same time, however, international criticism began to portray Zumthor in a very peculiar way, quite different from other star architects like Nouvel or Gehry, based on the premise that he operates in the, we could say, misty and mystic alpine environment. He is described indeed as an alpine shaman or as an hermit with a background as a cabinet maker who, enclosed in his sublime fortress in the mountains, design primordial and esoteric spaces and buildings. This is the portrait that emerges from the pages of many magazines including the Architectural Review, whose excerpts are presented in this slide. Actually, Hans Danuser peculiar misty and esoteric shots that introduced Zumthor work to the world and that are now part of the MoMA collection in New York, certainly fueled this narrative, this mystic narrative. Yet, as we have seen, Zumthor is anything but that. Actually, he is a designer highly attentive to the representation and to the reception of his own works, with a solid history of political, social, and cultural commitment to his territory. All these elements, except for rare exceptions, such as the Akleitner's writing in Casabella, Akleitner that knows very well the Swiss reality, all the publication never highlight the social and cultural work of Zumthor. Instead, they often omitted it completely. We are faced with a true construction of a character by the criticism, an image that will come to characterize Zumthor for the years to come. And indeed, in this kind of publication, the architects relegate their own architecture to the background, in a process that, according to Carlo Olmo, is characterized by fetishist return to life stories. This biographical approach can selectively emphasize or omit significant events in the life of an architect to build a particular narrative or to overshadow crucial issues, as we saw with Zumthor, where the relationship between him and the collective and the regional environment, cultural and architectural environment, is often not taken into account. Actually, the Architectural Review had already published Zumthor in a monographic issue dedicated to architecture of northern Switzerland, in contrast with the southern Switzerland that for the English readers is identified with Ticino, Ticino. In this issue of 1991, Zumthor was defined as an artist and Baumeister. That was an interesting resonance with the Baukünstler movement that born a few years earlier in the neighboring region of Vorarlberg, as we will see after. Even the cover representation of the song Benedetta was different because it was more cleaner and, let's say, classical. Let us look instead at the monography published by Architecture and Urbanism, the Japanese journal, in 1998, a monograph about Peter Zumthor. Here, in the cover, the Japanese photographer Shigeo Gawa captures precisely the esoteric and misty style of Danuser shots, and the St. Benedict Chapel and on the cover once again. This is the proof of how the very representation of Zumthor's work is by now influenced by the image that international criticism has constructed around him. In the meantime, Alpine architecture reached the peak of its international fame, mostly thanks to the cultural work of Neues Bauen in den Alpen, but also thanks to some international journals and some monographic issues. It is precisely in this period that the synecdoche between Grison's architecture and Alpine architecture became even more evident. The first monograph is by the Japanese magazine Architecture and Urbanism, once again, where we can find some very interesting essays by Martin Steinman and Jairo Daghini. Indeed, only a few years prior, the same Japanese magazine published an essay by Marcel Meili about the architecture of German Swiss. Marcel Meili was also a judge in Neues Bauen in den Alpen, and here we can see how all these protagonists and all these figures, in some way, they link to each other, they intersect to each other, their path, let's say. The second and, let's say, more fundamental piece is issue 14 of the Spanish journal 2G. This number was entirely dedicated to Grison's architecture. The volume opens with an anthology of Grisons that do not deeply analyze the central theme of the issue, which was instead explored to the projects of Bert and de Blazes, Caminada, Jüngling and Hagmann, Jürg Onset, and Christian Keretz. Interestingly, Peter Zumthor was absent from the project section. He was mentioned only in the initial anthology. This suggests that he had already surpassed the Grison's colleagues, many of whom had been his students and disciples, becoming to all intents and purposes their master. This issue of the Spanish magazine features the chapel in Operre Alta by Christian Keretz on the cover. The small sacred building made of reinforced concrete stands out against a lush vegetation, as we can see in this more recent photograph. The image immediately recalls the famous definition of German Swiss architecture given by Peter Buchanan in the Architectural Review in 1991, an arid architecture in a lush landscape, highlighting the contrasts that characterized the Grison architectural production at that time. But there is more. Once again, a sacred building was chosen for the cover of an international journal and used as a symbol of the entire Grisons and Alpine architecture. This some way consolidates this concept of Alpine iconodulia that we already saw with Zumthor's chapel, and which, as we will see shortly, will return about 20 years later. Meanwhile, the regional award in Grisons continued its journey with two editions in 1994 and 2001. The winning project of these editions are the very same ones that won the Neues Bauen in den Alpen award, and they are also the same that was published in the international leading magazine in the sector, just like the issue of 2G that we saw a moment ago. Among these, we find the School in Paspels by Olgiati, or the Interventions in Green by Caminada, or the Schools by Bert and de Blazes in Vella and Halbersheim. The new millennium, however, marked the end of the trajectory of Neues Bauen in den Alpen, whose last edition was held in 2006. Even in this final act, the Grisons dominated the scene, winning the first prize with the Girl Boarding School in Disentis by John Caminada. Actually ex aequo with the M Prize supermarket in Vents in Tirol by Rainer Köber. At this point, contemporary Alpine architecture had achieved definitive recognition in the international criticism. Nevertheless, from this moment on, Grison's architectural production seemed no longer able to keep pace with the critical debate in the sector. It remained somewhat overshadowed by the towering figures of its past. First and foremost, Zumthor, who a few years later would win the Pritzker Prize. Just like the Neues Bauen in den Alpen award, Grison architecture seemed to suffer from the arrival of the new millennium, struggling to capture the interest of critics except for sporadic cases. The fact remains that the local Gute Graubünden award continued to move forward with new editions, presently highly interesting architectural projects of younger architects. At the same time, however, the projects presented in the local award no longer seem to attract the attention of international publishing as in the 90s and the early 2000s. And also, they do not attract the attention of another international Pan-Alpine award that will be founded in 2010. But we will discuss later about this. Before, I would like to take a step back in time and move a few dozen kilometers farther northeast respect to Grisons to talk about the Austrian region of Vorarlberg. The history of the architectural culture of this small Austrian federal state actually runs in parallel with the one of the Grisons. And with Grisons, it shares a strong convergence of people, events, and also architectural works in some way. The main difference in the two regional paths lies in the fact that the architecture of Vorarlberg was not immediately swept up by the success of international jet set. On the contrary, it seemed that it remained under the radar, at least until the second decade of the new millennium. On this slide, we see one of the most important works of the second generation of the so-called Vorarlberger Bauschule, a formula coined by Friedrich Achleitner. That is the Siedlung im Fang, designed by the cooperative. There was a collective of young architects where also Dietmar Eberle was part. Dietmar Eberle that will found the Baumschlager-Eberle studio with Carlo Baumschlager. The project of the Siedlung im Fang perfectly encapsulates all the criteria and the approach of the so-called Baukünstler, a name that Vorarlberg Design gave themselves after a dispute with the Austrian Chamber of Architects. The Siedlung makes self-building as its cornerstone. Professional carpenters build the load-bearing timber structures, while the clients, together with the architects, build all the walls and floors according to the needs of the clients. This approach roots itself in the works of the first generation of the Vorarlberger Bauschule, represented by two leading figures, Hans Burin and Rudolf Weger. Weger had learned about Max Biel teaching on simplicity in design through his brothers that studied in Ulm School of Design. Weger tried to transfer this principle into his architecture, focusing on simple technologies, the assembly of industrial materials, and self-building practices. On this slide, we see two Siedlungen that embody these principles. On the left, the smaller one is the Siedlung Ruhwiesen by Degger, and on the right, the Siedlung Halde by Purin. However, the Baukünstler are not only active within the professional sphere in the 80s and the 90s. As we have already seen for the Graubünden, these young designers are deeply committed to cultural initiatives and to the construction of a local architectural culture. Prominent figures such as Roland Kneiger, for example, will contribute substantially not only as designers, but also in his case, as a presenter of a TV program, namely Plus Minus. This show was conceived in 1984 by the director of the ORF, that is the Austrian National Broadcasting Corporation, as well as a enthusiastic client of architecture with a strong interest in national architectural culture. The director decided to create this program. Plus Minus, in a way, anticipated the very fast pace that will characterize information on internet many years later. Each episode of the program lasted just 5 minutes and aired in prime time every Tuesday, immediately before the national evening news. So it was more like a Instagram reel, let's say. That highlighted what he considered their positive and negative aspects. The program aired for nearly a decade until 1993, during which the discussion extended far beyond the television screens, also in the pubs and the homes of the region. As Gneiger himself emphasized, the show helped to turn contemporary architecture into an object of public debate in Vorarlberg. As I was telling you, Gneiger was also an excellent architect. His school in Barth, which you see in the top right, along with numerous other works from these small Austrian lands, such as the school in Marul of Spagolla on the left, would receive important recognition from the award Neues Bauen in den Alpen. Yet, none of these works would ever manage to win the first prize and break the hegemony of Graubünden architecture. Another key figure of the regional architectural scene is Hermann Kaufmann. He too was presented in the role of honor of Neues Bauen in den Alpen and was specialized in timber structures. One of the prerogatives of Vorarlberg architecture is the massive use of timber in construction. On this slide, we see a highly interesting work by Kaufmann, that is the factory hall in Au, that highlight an interest in Vorarlberg designers to focus not only on the, let's say, elite architecture, but also on the utilitarian and often neglected projects like industrial buildings. While until the 90s, the recognition of the Baukünstler and the Vorarlberger Bauschule was restricted to a narrow circle of professionals and enthusiasts, it is with 1993, with the exhibition Architektur in Vorarlberg seit 1960, that their work achieved definitive institutional recognition. The exhibition was curated by Bernhard Purin, and in the catalog there are essays by Friedrich Leitner, once again, and Otto Kapfinger. There is a very interesting detail that tells us a lot about the spirit of the designers in Vorarlberg in those years. The realization of the exhibition, the organization, was made possible thanks to Hans Purin, that donated entirely a prize that he won, the Vorarlberg Art Prize, to fund the exhibition itself. This demonstrates the immense importance that these designers placed on the creation of a culture of a Baukultur at a regional scale. Another interesting element of this exhibition is the presence of Peter Zumthor with the project for the Kunsthaus Bregenz. This is one of the many links that we can found from between Grisons and Vorarlberg in those years. At the time, the building was not yet finished. Actually, it was finished in 1997. But Project Zumthor, the project of Zumthor, was, let's say, a foreign project for the Austrian and Vorarlberger designers. At the same time, the Baukunstler welcomed the project as a valuable stimulus from outside the region, demonstrating the cultural openness of the group. Another turning point for the Baukultur in Vorarlberg is the institution in 1997 of the Vorarlberger Architektur Institute, the BAI. The center was born thanks to an Austrian state fund that financed the opening of architectural centers in all the land, the Austrian land. From that moment on, the Vorarlberger Architektur Institute would play a prominent role in spreading local architectural culture through exhibitions, awards, publication, and tours. The Vorarlberger Architecture Institute also offers organizational and scientific support for one of the most significant local architecture awards, the Bauherren Prize, the Ripo Vorarlberg. The award was born in 1987, the same year as Gute Bauten Graubünden, another thinking common between the two regions. And this award has a unique characteristic. It is expressly dedicated to clients. The first Bauherren Prize in Austria actually was the national one, organized by the Zentralvereinigung der Architekten in Österreichs. That was awarded the first time in 1967. The Bauherren Prize, the Ripo Vorarlberg, is therefore a son, let's say, of this national award, and was established precisely in the years when the Baukünstler movement was beginning to gain ground and fame. Wolfgang Beitler, that is the current head of sponsorship of the bank Hypo, tell me that the decision of a financial institution to sponsor an architectural award stems primarily from its constant commitment to funding various architectural projects, from private to housing, to social housing, to schools. And the consequent interest of the bank in elevating its construction quality. This brings back a cornerstone of my argumentation this evening, that is that creating culture and critical work regarding architecture are not purely theoretical speculation for their own, but action with a massive social and economic impact. And that is not merely a theoretical issue, is also demonstrated by another regional award, that is the Vorarlberger Holzbaupreis, active only since 1997. This award is dedicated to timber construction and was organized by the Vorarlberger Holzbaukunst Association, created in 1997 inside the Chamber of Commerce of Vorarlberg. The goal of this award, once again, beyond the creation of culture, is the promotion of the timber construction supply chain. Not by chance, the aforementioned association includes not only designers, but also the main leading regional companies in the sector. In this regard, I forgot before, but it should be remembered that Kaufmann Holz, that is one of the main sawmills in Vorarlberg, also sponsored Neues Bauen in den Alpen. A demonstration that culture is a fundamental engine for these people, and that it has to be viewed as an economic return also, and as a territorial development. Yet, despite the vibrant cultural scene between the 90s and the early 2000s, Vorarlberg struggled to appear in the main international trade magazines, unlike Grison architecture. The only notable exception is the monography that the Spanish journal 2G dedicated to the duo Baumschlager and Heberle in 1999, a year before the monograph about Grison's architecture. Nevertheless, the definitive international consecration of the small Austrian land would arrive a few years later in 2003, thanks to the exhibition Constructive Provocation, organized by the Vorarlberg Architecture Institute and the Institut Français d'Architecture. It will be this traveling exhibition between Austria and France, together with the catalog curated by Otto Kapfinger, that will definitively open the doors of the land to international attention. In the meantime, as I mentioned before, in 2010, the historic Neues Bauen in den Alpen was replaced by another award on an alpine scale, Constructive Alps, organized by the Principality of Liechtenstein and the CIPRA, the International Commission for the Protection of the Alps. This award introduced two major novelties. First of all, it has a precise and central theme: energy and environmental sustainability of architecture. Secondly, it adopts a well-defined geographic perimeter, that is the one of Alpine Convention, including the urban territories that the award curated by Fingerle, Neues Bauen in den Alpen, excluded. But there is a paradox, because despite the award recognize many urban buildings, the winners continue to reflect the aesthetic canons previously constructed by Neues Bauen in den Alpen. There is a substantial difference, because this time is no longer the architectural production of the Grisons that dominates the scene, but precisely the architecture from Vorarlberg. Indeed, the first edition was born by the Gemeindehaus in Raggel, a project by Johannes Kaufmann, the brother of Hermann Kaufmann. The building was realized almost entirely in timber and with very high energy performance. Immediately imposed itself as the manifesto of a new and, we could say, green alpine architecture. The subsequent editions of Constructive Alps, held in 2013, 15, 17, 20, and the last in 2022, will increasingly recognize projects from Vorarlberg, highlighting an important dichotomy between this new role of honor and the historical one of Neues Bauen in den Alpen. To borrow a Leitner's word, the two awards demonstrate that an absolute categorization is impossible, because it always depends on the direction taken by the criticism and the jury members in this case, and the criteria, objective or subjective, that they chooses to use. Among the winning project of Constructive Alps is, for example, the Pfarrhaus in Krumbach by Bernardo Bader, that won the 2015 edition. This work was realized in collaboration with Hermann Kaufmann and René Bechter, and it represents only a small part of the profound work that Bader is carrying out in the Bregenzerwald, and in particular in his hometown of Krumbach. In 2020, it was once again the turn of Johannes Kaufmann, who placed second with the expansion of the family carpentry business, the Kaufmann Zimmerei, a site on which his brother Hermann also worked in the early 90s. This project reiterates the attention given by local designers to utilitarian and workspace architecture, such as an industrial warehouse. At the same time, the building reflects the communication strategies adopted by many regional companies, which present themselves collectively in the association Vorarlberger Holzbaukunst. The expertise and the history of the Kaufmann family are encapsulated and highlighted in this building, which serves at a dual scope, dual aim. First one is a productive structure, his main function. And secondly, is a monumental billboard, sponsor, let's say, of the professionalism and of the competencies of the company. However, Bader is undoubtedly the main protagonist of the new generation in Vorarlberg. He won different awards, both locally and internationally. But also Bader managed to do that the Grison designers had what the Grison designers have achieved 20 years later, so to capture the attention of international criticism. Indeed, he receives widespread recognition and it was published in important monographs and issues, such as the one by the Spanish magazine El Croquis in 2020 and the Japanese Architecture and Urbanism in 2022. It is some way curious, let's say, that his most famous and published project is the Salgenreute Chapel in Krumbach. Looking at it, it is possible to notice that somewhere recalls 30 years later Zumthor Chapel, St. Benedict Chapel in Zumwijk. Once again, a small piece of sacred architecture is elevated as an icon of the entire contemporary Alpine production. This continues the phenomenon of the Alpine iconodulia that we described earlier, and reveals once again the critic's tendency to attribute a strong and presumed spiritual and mystic characterization to mountain architecture. I'm moving toward the conclusions. I will try to sum up this brief journey across 30 years and to Alpine regions. The work of international criticism, as we have seen emblematically with Neues Bauen in den Alpen, had the great merit of institutionalize and legitimize a specific group of designers operating in the Alps. However, it did it by losing sight often of local processes, local specificities, and the very relationships between the actors involved. When in 1995, Bruno Reiklin writes that Alpine architecture is a working hypothesis of architectural criticism, he performs a double action, let's say. On one hand, he creates the group, the milieu of Alpine architects. But on the other, he fragments it into single individualities. He presents these designers as subjects unable to team up on their own, unifiable only through the knowledge of a third-party actor, namely architectural criticism. In this way, all the bottom-up local-scale cultural processes that we talk about in this presentation were left behind in the shadows. The imposition of this working hypothesis represented a watershed in the history of Alpine architecture, because it brought fame to those who fell inside the group, but at the same time, it excluded many other designers, overshadowing more little territorial dynamics. Dynamics that were the result of a solid cultural planning and that guided not only architectural development, but also the socio-economic growth of entire regions such as Vorarlberg or Grisons. If Alpine architecture is a cultural construct, as suggested by the diagram on the slide that shows overlapping publication that I analyzed in my research, today we can say that the international criticism has only done a part of this work, because the foundations of this phenomenon actually are rooted in the local processes carried on by often young designers in the 70s and in the 80s. So the protagonists of this story, people, designers, critics, judges, represent a fundamental piece just as much as the architectural works they designed or they evaluated or they criticize. Thus, the construction of contemporary alpine architecture, although it has often been legitimized in cultural centers outside the mountains, such as, for example, Milan or Turin or Zurich, it is first and foremost the reworking of an extraordinary and lively local activity. A life that is immediately apparent if we look at the network of relationship linking actors, publication awards, works, etc. In both regions, Grisons and Graubünden, the new architecture, this new contemporary architecture, was anticipated by a strong political, social, and cultural commitment of the designer, who were capable of acting in collectives, so not as individuals, but as a group. This collective commitment went beyond the personal interest of the individual designer and promoted the cultural growth of the territory and the direct involvement of citizens. We saw the same collective spirit in Grisons and Vorarlberg. In the 90s, those practices became institutionalized with architectural centers such as the Vorarlberg Architecture Institute, and became a shared heritage for the entire population. The constant work of dissemination did the rest, leading to the international recognition of not just the buildings, but of an entire regional architectural culture. In conclusion, to fully understand the lesson of contemporary urban architecture, we must develop a precise awareness. The one that quality architecture does not born in a vacuum, but needs a solid culture rooted in the territory and shared by its population. This culture is indeed a construct of criticism, as Reichelin argued, but it is fueled by real bottom-up processes, as shown by the stories of Grisons and Vorarlberg. All of this requires true cultural planning, and it is a path that does not guarantee immediate economic return, but shows long-term value, because it allows professional administrations and citizens to recognize the quality of the space they live in, to develop a deep awareness of their environment, and to know how to choose the best for their territory autonomously without needing the blessing of a third-party actor. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your bright and really large perspective on the architecture production in the Grisons, in Vorarlberg, but even further. I think it's quite important to realize and to see what happens there, or what was happening there. I think even because it's a process, it's not just finished, it will continue. Zumthor probably is not anymore the main figure today. He builds in LA and so on. So his focus, his personal focus has shifted, but there is another generation which will come and will need this support and this kind of things. But all these publications, the main publications you named are a bit are mainly architecture publications, so it's a little bit publications which stay in the discourse of the anyway interested crowd. Nevertheless, this is very well. It's easier to understand what happens there and who talks with whom and how it continues. And it gives a line or an understanding, a basic understanding what really is important. But do you see a result? All these publications, what was the result for the architects at the end? Was it important in their career, and in which sense?
But I think that yes, in most of the cases, it was important for the individual because, as I told in these last sentences, um, it is difficult. It was difficult that criticism, let's say, treat about the collective effort to build a culture. Often, the criticism focused only on the individual designer and individual architect because probably it's easier to do this. So for the individual, according to me, it was for sure, let's say, an important thing, the recognition, because let's say it's like a vortex. When you are recognized by one journal, then you can be recognized in other one, in other kind of publication, and it's like a spiral. Let's say when the recognition grows more and more, and with recognition, obviously, came also works, and so money, and so other recognition. In most of the cases is like this, I think. The case of Zumthor is peculiar in this way because uh, actually he stated in some interviews that he do not like that his work are published, and they don't, let's say, in the number of architecture and urbanism, the monograph, he stated this stuff. But I think that he knows, because it's very obviously very smart and good designer. He knows that the publications are very important for the career of any architect. So the recognition is very important, I think.
Probably no wonder he had chosen, or it happened, I think it's not happened because of a casual happening. It's really happened because of an interest and even friendship, that Danuser was photographing Zumthor. And it's quite interesting that out of this friendship, to look and to work out of the box, he realized that they were really pushing each other and each other's career.
Yeah.
And it's quite interesting that what really happened. It was not the photographer as a service for another for the architect. It's much more. It's a ping pong thing which they did, and that's quite fantastic because it's really pushing the limits of the profession. And we often can see that people through friendship meet each other and do something special and push each other to a different level. And that's really possible. We have it in several times in Graubünden, but even in Vorarlberg, you can see this. And it's quite important. Just last week, we had a discussion with Nicola Baserga from Baserga Mozzetti, which they were talking about the same thing in their work today, that especially these friendship things are pushing ahead and each other. And that's quite an important thing, which is quite social, quite
Yeah.
under. It's not really obvious, but then at the end, I think it's a crucial issue for the whole thing. And it's not just about just business. It's much more. It's for the project. It's a cultural aspect and so on.
Yeah, I can say that, for example, it is not so, how to say, it's not easy to find place where there is a group that collectively work toward a goal that is shared. Because often professionals, let's say, do not, they want to keep the stuff for themselves. They do not want to share. And I'm not talking only about works, but also of events, cultural stuff, etc. So I think that what happened in Vorarlberg and Grisons in the last 30 years it is a very, very interesting and peculiar story.
And mainly that, for example, in Grison, that they founded the Werkbund was a particular funding act to be separated from the normal production and to do something about themselves, for themselves, to push it forward. Have you studied even what happened in the journals, the normal journal, or is this completely outside?
No, I did not study. I did not study that part. Let's say for two main reasons. One was the language, because obviously so uh, let's say good with Deutsch, and so it would be very difficult. And the others for the amount of journals of materials that there is very, very work intensive, let's say, to study about.
It is very intensive. It's more sometimes, but it's just what I'm interested in is a little bit how to jump out of the box of the architect himself. And of course, especially these prizes were quite a good thing to go out and to do something much larger and much more interesting. These awards, that's really a clever thing to think larger. And it's interesting that at the beginning these awards were quite local.
Yeah.
And with Constructive Alps, we have even a bigger picture on the whole thing, but I still think it's important to cultivate the local architecture culture and the local architecture construction. I'm just I know it's very difficult to find these journals, and often you have only people talking about what happened and not really why, and it's not really a discourse. Usually it's not a discourse in journal. It depends a bit how clever the journal works. Often they are much more an image of what happens, and this makes it a little bit difficult sometimes to follow the discourse or what the discourse. The intellectual discourse for sure is much more in the architecture magazine. Nevertheless, I think these two things are important to keep in mind and to push forward. And I think it's important that we don't get out of this as architects. We don't get out of the general publications. Even it's quite difficult. I don't know how it is in the Piedmont, for example, if architecture is in any way important or published.
No, it's published, let's say, new projects, big urban projects like this are publicated on the generalist publications, but say in a very as a chronicle in some way. There's no a theory or a criticism, a real criticism beyond it. Probably the only criticism is about money, but there is no architectural criticism or a theory beyond the commentary of those buildings. We have to say that it's also difficult to find someone, so, not someone, sorry, something to build a critic on, because the architectural quality is very rare, uh, more and more. So let's say also the starting material is not so stimulating, let's say.
I was more, sometimes it's quite good to understand how it works in other regions, to understand your own thing. I was pointing this out because in Switzerland we had at the Neue Zürcher Zeitung, in this conservative, largely published newspaper, there was really a person there, really who was completely dedicated to architecture and design. And he did extremely good work, especially in the beginning. Always was quite fascinated of what happened in the South Tyrolean area, and he was pushing it quite a lot. Sometimes it's quite important that certain figures are really pushing and helping it, that really something is able to flourish and to get a deeper understanding. And especially prizes and publications are quite important to make it out of the box, to make it visible. And sometimes it's needed to make it visible to get an idea what you really do and what is possible. And no wonder we are traveling, people are traveling to Graubünden to see these works, or we are traveling to Vorarlberg and South Tyrol and so on to see these works, because it's challenging and it's interesting and it's quite fascinating. What I was interested as well in your whole discourse, that sometimes these basic themes, these local themes, which were super important, for example, these questions of heritage in Graubünden, in the Grisons, they were not so present in the discourse, but it was a super important issue in the discourse, in the formation of these people and in the publishing. It was quite interesting that you pointed out that these social issues, these cultural issues, in this step away. Often people who wrote about it, Achleitner is in Vienna, it's not in Vorarlberg. Kampfliger is in Vienna, not in Vorarlberg. Reichlin is in the Ticino, not in the Grison. Marcel Meili in Zurich, and so on. So you have a lot of people, if you look from the outside,
Yeah.
discussing the whole thing. Meyer Fingerle for sure is a special figure because it's completely from the inside, a motor. We miss these kind of people, and I think it's quite important how do you value that the people are quite often from the outside. Is it needed to be free, or is it much more, is it a help if somebody from outside talks about it?
I don't know, but some way it helps. It helped. As you said, let's say I'm also an outsider some way, because I'm from Rome. So I was uh, quite detached from the Alpine context, particularly in the beginning of my research. So I think that some way to be more objective, detached gaze help to to let's say to do a better work. On the other side, obviously, there is a counterpart that is that you can lose some of the stuff that goes on at a more regional scale. Probably one reason is because you are not there always, and the other is because sometimes people do not want to show the stuff that they do. I think these are the main questions. So as all the other things in the life, let's say, right amount of external gaze and internal participation, it is, I think it is perfect. But nevertheless, I think it's impossible to to to, to make a perfect work. I was thinking about, for example, Rainer Banham when he talked about brutalism, and a year or 2 years after, the Smithsons published a review of the book of Banham, saying that despite the fact that he was with them all the time, he didn't understand anything of the thing that happens. So I don't know. It's very difficult for a critic, for a person that have to explain something, to write about something, to good work, and to not, let's say, punished, or to not idolatrate someone. We have to remain in the gray spot, let's say, not so white, not so black. It's not easy.
And of course, all the local issues are sometimes not so interesting in the larger part for a public which is much more away. And I think, especially when you go to see the Roman shelters from Zumthor, then it's a very typical thing. We all have seen these photographs. They are from behind,
Yeah,
from the garden side. We all think it must be like Keret's Chapel, somewhere outside in the green field.
yeah,
And if you're going to see and visit it the first time, you're always quite shocked. No, it can't be here. So the image, what we transfer, how we catch the people, how we are confronted with the whole thing. Sometimes it's not the reality. It's our imagination of the pureness in the Alps.
but also the baths, thermal baths, is the same.
Yeah.
They are in a urban environment in some way, because they are in the middle of 10-story buildings, hotel buildings, etc. So when you saw them in the publication, it seems that they are in a, let's say, in a slope without anything near, in the green fields, etc. But it's not like this, obviously. So yeah.
Nevertheless, it's quite important to think out of the box and we were discussing a little bit. Your book was very much published. If you quote the names, it was always Zumthor, Caminada, these very famous names. And in Vorarlberg, we don't have these big names. And therefore, the names and sometimes in Vorarlberg, it's very well as well ordered like different generations. And I think it's quite important that you don't have in Vorarlberg these really big names who shade all the rest. It's very much about generations. It's about people, about working together and bringing together something. Or is this a little bit a romantic point of view?
No, I think it's true. The main difference between the two regions is this one, that in Grisons you have the masters, let's say. So you have Peter Zumthor, Ruggiati, etc. That some way shadow the other young designers. My research, I research about your exhibition that you curated about the young designers, and also there is for example, an issue of Architecture and Urbanism that talked about young Swiss designers under 40. But nevertheless, let's say the prominent figures of Zumthor and the others also today probably cast a little shadow on the others. In Vorarlberg, it's not like this. As I told, apart from the exception, for example, of Baumschlager Heberle, that had an enormous fame in the last year of the 90s and the early 2000s, also because they work directly with a constructor of housing in Vorarlberg, so they built a lot of housing and they had a lot of projects to show, let's say, to the international public. And apart probably from Bader in the last years that earn a lot of recognition. The other designers were, let's say, all excellent designers, but you never have a person that is too high respect to another to cast a shadow on, let's say, his young disciples or student or colleague. And this is, let's say, at in some way a better situation, obviously, for the architecture because there is more exchange probably between different generations, and there's not the risk to remain attached to, let's say, some dogmas, some kind of images that the masters show us.
It's you even it's a bit a side question, but you checked as well the situation in Alto Adige or in South Tyrol?
Let's say in a side way. Also because studying Neues Bauen in den Alpen, that was a South Tyrolean award, I, let's say, touched it a little bit, but no, I didn't study it very well. There are also other researchers of my colleagues that focus particularly on South Tyrolean situation. That some way is very similar to the one of Vorarlberg and Grisons. It developed a little after, not too much, but let's say 10 years after. But also it is characterized by the same dynamics. So young designers that are involved in cultural events, awards. Also in Alto Adige there is, apart from Neues Bauen in den Alpen, local awards, both for architecture, and there is also another one that is dedicated to timber constructions. There is, for example, as in Vorarlberg, a TV program that is dedicated to contemporary architecture. The format is different, but it is also transmitted in the, let's say, local television. So I see a lot of points of in common between Grisons, Vorarlberg, and South Tyrol. Nevertheless, there is also in South Tyrol, as in Vorarlberg, for example, in the last years, probably a sort of stagnation of imaginaries. Because also in Vorarlberg, also as Verena Conrad, there is the director of Vorarlberg Architecture Institute, stated that let's say the culture in timber construction is obviously good, but at the same time it influences too much the image of the architecture that has to be produced that way. So if you are an architect in Vorarlberg, you cannot do anything different because the architecture is that kind of stuff. So if we want to find, let's say, a hair, a gray hair, is this one. So the fact that there's a risk to, let's say, homogenization of the imaginaries of architecture.
Yeah, very much. It happens on the other side, especially in Vorarlberg. We have Marte, who jump out of that box,
Yeah,
and
they start work with concrete.
they did the whole thing with concrete. But yes, of course, this homogenization is always a thing, and it's even a trap if if it shifts into a certain banality. Brena Conrad already pointed this a little bit out, that the complexity of this research, Weger, Purin, the younger generations all did, fades out in a little bit in a homogenization, and it's in a normal production, which is not anymore so much out of the box as it maybe looks like. That's a bit what happens. I think it's even our task to enlarge these box again, because I think these places are different from other places, and the techniques they developed, and we can still enlarge it. A very fine example is although this work, for example, Lehm, Ton, Erde with Martin
Yeah,
Rauch did,
yeah,
jumped completely out of the box and was researching a construction technique. Everybody thought, oh no, how you can do something. And it was quite interesting with the point that Martin Rauch came together with Roger Bolzhaus and did the house for Martin Rauch. This was a turning point for this way of constructing. Again, this house created images.
yeah.
They were published, they were known, they were recognized, and it was a jump out of the box of the niche into, I don't want to say mainstream, but into a certain possibility, recognized possibility kind of architecture. Again, this was 20 years ago about
Yeah, more or less.
already. And what you see today, that you have this mass production, that firms like Ricola produce their own production hall in this rammed earth, is a step which wouldn't have been possible without this. So it's a very good sign that this research is continuing, and is very important to push the limits as well. Probably it's not just wood. It's not pre-stressed wood. It's even combination with different materials. I think the good thing in this kind of architecture is, in the Alpine architecture, is a certain liberty. We discussed about friendships, and people talk with each other, trust each other, and this gives you possibilities to try out something.
Mhm. Yeah,
And there you can enlarge the limits of architecture, of culture, of technical issues. Much more easy to test and to try out. If you are in Zurich and the prices are, what to say, 10 times the same thing, this per square meter, but it doesn't matter. But it's just so much more that it's a lot of more money involved, and these limits are less possible. I talked with Nagler. They wanted to try out things, even with TU. At the end, they did these 3 houses, these test houses, somewhere outside in Bad Aiching, one in brick, one in concrete, and one in wood. Einfach bauen, simple constructions. And I think that's an important thing, that we need to go out to refresh our mind. And I think that's the incredible possibilities we have in these alpine areas. And I think it's quite important, not just as a test area, but as well as a thinking area and as an intellectual area. And that's the main issue. But I think it's important that architecture stays a social and cultural issue. And here we can learn a lot in this contemporary way what previous generations have done. That's probably why I did these exhibitions and so on, to push a little bit the limits and boundaries. What do you think was needed to keep this motor, and not as a motor in the sense of production, but as a sense of thinking, rethinking, and trying to step beyond the boundaries of today? What's needed to do there? Or what can be learned out of this of the research?
Yeah, it's a very difficult question. I think that one of the main, let's say, necessities is to bring, as you said before, bring architecture outside the professional field, and I speak particularly for the Italian context, and to bring it among the public in different ways, with exhibitions, with the publication in general, not only on specialized journals, but also on general ones. The other thing is to also, as you said, to think outside the box, because obviously we cannot think that the stuff that any designers did in the 90s could work nowadays, because it is a total different world. It's like to say that a thing that was made in 1920, it was good in the 90s. Probably let's say I don't know what to say in English, the difference between the period was the same, because now it is a different world. We have different methodologies, different tools, different conditions. The climate, for example, the climate was the same, but let's say different awareness about the condition that we live in. So it is necessary to think outside the box. And this is not so easy, because obviously most of the architects and the professionals try to, let's say, maximize their profit. And to do this, if they find a work that an element, let's say an image that works, they tend to repropose it ad libitum, ad infinitum, because it is, let's say, the minimum effort for the maximum gain. So I think this is the main challenge of architecture, to go outside the comfort zone in some way, and to try to do something different, something that probably in the first time could be not completely understood, as the museum in Davos, the Hirchner Museum that you mentioned before, but that some way could, not immediately, but after some time, could bring an evolution and an evolution of our field.
It brings another issue in the whole discourse, is the social context. And it's a particular social context. I had a discourse with Lukas Trammerlen from South Tyrol recently. They work and design in a specific context where they live. So on one hand, it's it's very good because you know everybody, but everything you do, everybody knows what you do. So it's a little bit the whole thing. So you're completely in this context. You can't really completely step out, and it's quite essential that you are in contact with the social issue. And I think it's quite important that architecture stays in the social, remains social and remains in contact with the people we build for. I think it's quite important that we even trust in young architects. It's not the old generation who did everything right. We always know that if you do competitions, often a young office is winning. That's good, healthy, and important because they bring new issues, new developments into the whole process of thinking where we are and what's probably needed, and not just reuse the existing concepts, which are probably a little bit outdated or not anymore in the center of state of the art. Or I think architecture is always a certain research, is a certain testing the limits, and it will remain like this. And we should keep this attitude that it's progress involved and part of the culture. And this is even the society is changing and developing.
Yeah, I agree totally.
Yeah, and especially when you see the context in Turin, I can name so many people here in Switzerland who really admire what happened in Turin, talking about old architecture, but even post-war, what
Yeah,
happened there. And in a certain moment, it stopped. Why? Or at least it's interesting how to push it forward,
yeah,
because architecture is not just an investment.
no,
And that's an important message we have to give and to cultivate. The institute you're working in Turin is very much focusing on these cultural issues and not just on the masterpieces. It's much more in this mid-level
yeah,
thing. They try to work and push forward the architecture, and that's quite important because otherwise nothing is really happening, because you have these big shadows, and it's a social thing which is needed, and that's very important. And what's nice today, even the media shifted completely. What we look at today is not anymore the same thing as
yeah,
20 years ago. Instagram and so on is much more important. Newsletter is important. If you read a newspaper or even probably even architecture magazine, we don't think we are really informed. We get a specific field of knowledge or aside from the knowledge, but we don't get the perspective. And there are other medias which are far larger. So we have even the possibilities to be a bit outside of the box, to
yeah,
be seen, and that's an important thing we need to cultivate.
yeah, I agree also. Let's say there are also a lot of possibilities with the new media. Uh, there are some risks because if you want, you can, let's say, in some way, siloing yourself in only one argument, in only your idea. You can remain, let's say, in your womb in some way and not discover anything new. But at the same time, if you want, if you are curious, uh, if you are able also to do that, you can, as you said, go from one blog, one newsletter to another, to inform yourself, to discover something new. That is quite difficult actually in the more traditional media like journals. Also because they function in very, let's say, peculiar ways where also contacts and friendships some way influence the stuff that are published, while the web is not like this, because on the web you can find anything you want, and potentially there are no filters. This is obviously a risk because you have to be focused some way. Otherwise, you will lost yourself in millions of images, etc. But at the same time, it's a great potential that journals doesn't have.
Another thing which is just occurred to me, what's interesting in the whole thing you showed, there are only architects, practicing architects, writing and discussing it. It's very much, it's not the journalist thing. It's not a thing by media. It's not a public relation thing. It's very much out of the profession, going outside. And I think that's the great thing. You know, I receive so many newsletters, which I always delete again, from not interesting projects. And if we see all the people who were writing on architecture and on the whole thing you showed, Achleitner, Kampfliger, Bruno Reichlin, Marcel Meili, Christian Fingerle, and so on, Meyer Fingerle, all these people, they were practicing architects. I think that's the big issue. We need to work out of the practice because that's what we know and that's part of the culture. And then it gets much more confident and it's rooted in culture and in the things which really happen and which are really important and not just in a PR thing, which is just an image.
Yeah. An interesting stuff about this, for example, is in Vorarlberg, the Holzbaukunst Association. They're actually born not on the idea of architects, but it was founded by Matthias Ammann. That actually it is, I don't know its profession, but it works. It worked in the Chamber of Commerce of Vorarlberg. And he worked with carpenters and with companies, and he decided why not to try to create something like this. So actually it was a stuff that born completely outside the architecture field. Obviously then it came in, but it was born outside. And it is very interesting and stimulating to discover how, in the first place, the companies and the carpenters, sawmills, etc., contributes immediately to the association and sponsor the award because they understand the value of this kind of operations. So sometimes we, as architects, are a little bit snob, probably. And we think that outside our environment, all the persons are profane, they do not understand the values, they are not worth to talk with them, not obviously on the professional sphere, obviously. And it's not worth to argue with them. But actually, it's not like this, and this experience demonstrated that it is important, and it is not so, let's say, obvious that people outside the professional sphere do not share or understand our interest.
And that's probably a very important lesson. It's grown outside of the profession, but it's grown obviously with a very, I don't think it would have grown without any tension, or it was an economical tension in the Vorarlberg to get outside and to do something out of the box. And this economical tension created a certain openness. We need to do something. And I think that's a very interesting issue, that you can't, it didn't stay just in the sawing mill, in the sawing, wood sawing, cutting, edge. It really reached out to different professions. And it reached out because it was needed to reach out. And it's interesting that in Switzerland this didn't happen so far. Or it happened today, yes. But I know projects from 94, just on the other side of the Rhine in Switzerland, which architects designed, and the Swiss companies couldn't deliver that prefabrication they were really focusing on. And this was cost-wise and the conceptual-wise a really step forward. And so they ordered all the elements just on the other side of the Rhine. It was cheaper. They were much more advanced, but it was much more the advanced thing, which was the challenging thing. And I think this advancedness is the great thing. This and the collaboration part is today probably an issue which is much more and more important, that it's much more in a collaboration. You have the structural engineer, we have the architect, which need to work together, even other groups which need to work together to be able to fulfill a building. And it's not anymore the master, if it's design, which is from the 90s, an image. And of course it's shifting, but nevertheless, this thing of friendshipness, of stepping out of the box stays the same. And I think there is a potential which is super important. And this we need to cultivate.
Yeah, totally agree.
Okay. I think thank you very much for even for the discussion and this large overview. I think it's quite inspiring to think about where we are today. I think it's I would think it's a pity to see your work as a historical work. I think we should learn from it. Then
Thank you
it's
very much.
super cool. Then it's super cool because I think we are in a crucial moment where really things are happening. Where things are happening in a different level, and this we need to push. And especially in architecture, we know that things are changing very much at the moment. Things I was teaching 10 years ago, 15 years ago are not anymore. It's not anymore the same reality. And nevertheless, it's important that we don't have, I see it in Graubünden, we have in Chur, we have 4 offices which are quite large, which do quite a lot. But that's the architecture production. I think we need even to think about architecture, to do a cultural rooting of the whole process and of the whole thing. And that's quite important. And their teamwork and all what we can do is part of it. And it's an important thing. Here in Switzerland, Vorarlberg, doesn't
Italy,
matter,
everywhere.
even in your place. And only with this we are able to go forward. And it's not just a question about the cities, it's a social thing which is
Yeah.
quite important. Because we don't, if we only push the cities and if you only push these big things, we get a problem even with all these political questions of where is our work going and who's doing our work. And I think it's quite important that handcraft and local kind of things are still cultivated, and
Yeah.
especially here in architecture we can do quite a lot what John Caminada showed us, which other people showed us, and that's quite important. We just need to learn and do.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. It was a
Have a
pleasure.
very nice evening. It was a pleasure to see you again and to talk about the whole thing. And let's keep the discussion going, and probably we need to do more exhibitions.
Yeah, for sure. I wait for you to.
Exactly. See you. Thank you much.
Bye bye. Bye bye.
Bye.